In this video, we will run through a guided lesson for restaurant professionals to increase their knowledge on fostering equity and inclusion to grow leadership support for workplace mental health. So what comes with an equitable workplace? We'll discuss how stigma, microaggressions, and other forms of discrimination show up. I will also explain how inclusion helps prevent toxic work environments and reduce turnover. And lastly, I will share a few examples for how managers and leaders can develop inclusive leadership skills. Our mental health is always directly tied to how we move and are perceived in the world. As a leader and manager, it's important to consider how these factors affect mental health. Racism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism. It's incredibly important to acknowledge that for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, for the LGBTQIA2S+ community, the disabled community, and those whose identities exist in the intersection of multiple identities, that discrimination, racism, ableism, heterosexism, and classism are never separate from our experience of the world. This discrimination is constant. It's overlapping, isolating, and marginalizing. It also often happens in the workplace, and its accumulated effects can lead to a low sense of belonging, less psychological safety, and an overall decline in well-being. Acts of discrimination can be outright and violent, or subtle and commonplace in the form of a microaggression. In either case, all discrimination chips away at one's mental health. If you're wondering what a microaggression is, they are brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities. Whether intentional or unintentional, they communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults towards people of color. Multiple studies indicate a significant association between experiencing microaggressions and high levels of depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and decreased levels of self-esteem. If employees are routinely expected to stay late, perform work outside of their job description, skip breaks, and are not adequately compensated for their extra labor, that is exploitation. And unfortunately, this happens far too often in restaurants and bars. Additionally, consider how the hospitality industry has traditionally been exploitative of women, BIPOC, and the LGBTQI2S+ community, as well as the disabled community. Having been built off the labor of marginalized people, the restaurant industry brings with it a legacy of poor physical, emotional, and psychological treatment of these groups. Historically, underrepresented minorities are more likely to experience bullying and disrespectful behavior in the workplace. Compounding all of the factors we've discussed so far is the inherent stigma in mental health itself. So what is stigma? Why is it important? Stigma is a negative association with a circumstance, person, or place. Stigma makes it so that people automatically assume experiencing mental health challenges is a negative thing, even though mental health is a neutral term. The stigma surrounding mental health is particularly dangerous as it silences needed conversations and requests for help. When mental health is stigmatized, the individual feels increased shame and isolation and is less likely to seek the help they need. Inclusive leadership encourages open discussions. This helps the destigmatization of mental health challenges and an improvement to the psychological safety of our workplaces. We can't discuss discrimination, equity, and inclusion in the workplace without including psychological safety. I'm going to run through a couple examples of how to foster equitable team psychological safety. First, it's important for leaders and managers to model vulnerability by sharing personal perspectives on work, mistakes, and failures. This normalizes it for everyone else. Always remember to model the behavior that you expect from your employees. Employees look up to leaders for guidance on culture, but they tend to discount lofty statements about abstract values. Instead, they closely observe what leaders do for signals about what behavior is encouraged, expected, and tolerated. Encourage interdependence and collaborative work by mandating decision-making be done in pairs or groups. The more interconnected teamwork we do, the better it is for everyone. Show gratitude regularly for contributions from your team. Also, highlight mistakes as opportunities for progress and a natural part of the learning process. Make sure to share mistakes openly so that everyone can learn from them and ensure that they do not get penalized. Publicly report progress and track progress with honest data. In many companies, bad news about toxic behaviors get filtered out as it moves up the hierarchy. Sharing the progress of programs helps keep everyone transparent. This can also help senior leaders maintain focus when it comes to detoxing their culture. Leaders cannot afford to disregard external employee reviews when trying to assess their corporate culture, warts and all. Focus on solutions over blame when things go wrong. When we're not fostering an equitable workplace, what often results is a toxic work culture. During the Great Resignation, toxic work culture became the single biggest predictor of attrition. As I mentioned in the first video, there are 5 attributes to a toxic workplace, and the first is non-inclusive. So inclusion becomes one of the most important things for leaders to focus on. As leaders, we need to encourage the representation of diverse groups of employees and whether they are treated fairly, made to feel welcome, and included in key decisions. Collectively, non-inclusive work environments is the most powerful predictor of whether employees view their organization's culture as toxic. To assess whether your restaurant or bar provides a fair and inclusive environment for specific demographic groups, include reviewing these 5 topics: gender, race, sexual identity and orientation, disability, and age. All of these identity-related topics rank in the top strongest predictors of a toxic culture. The best approach for inclusive leadership will depend on the individual organization, restaurant, or bar. Its strategy and specific situation may change depending on the specific workplace culture you already have. The only thing of real importance that leaders do is to create and manage culture. Without a commitment from the top team, from the owners and operators, any organization-wide culture change, including a detox, is destined to fail. We covered a little bit about stigma, microaggressions, and other forms of discrimination in the workplace. It's important when discussing equitable psychological safety for your team that you keep intersectionality in mind. If you want to learn more about equitable psychological safety, check out the CNECTed course by Not 9 to 5. And if you want to learn more about leadership support, tune in to the next video.